Usually when we talk about being in control of our lives, there's this underlying expectation of mechanics, like
Mm.
driving a car. You turn the steering wheel left, the tires pivot left, and the car goes left.
Right, yeah. You hit the brakes, it stops. It's highly mechanical. And it's comforting because your input basically guarantees the specific output.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
then you encounter a situation where the steering wheel essentially detaches in your hands. You find yourself navigating a profoundly toxic workplace or maybe a deeply adversarial family feud.
Or even watching a massive global crisis unfold on the news. Suddenly, all that mechanical control you thought you had is just exposed as a total illusion.
Yeah, you realize you're just in free fall. Welcome back to another deep dive. Today we are extracting a masterclass on spiritual resilience, and we're doing it by connecting what seems like a completely chaotic, intimidating stack of sources.
It really is quite a stack.
It is. We're taking a 5,000-year-old family feud from the ancient Sanskrit texts of the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Mundaka Upanishad, and we're cross-referencing it with modern psychological frameworks from the GAP series by Sukhavadasi.
Which is such a brilliant combination.
Right. And we're also layering in sociological research on 1970s cult deprogramming panics, and perhaps most surprisingly, a really gritty structural analysis of the modern U.S.-Iran geopolitical conflict.
I mean, on the surface, that sounds like we just threw darts at a library wall.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating here is how this 5,000-year-old text perfectly diagnoses the root of modern political and personal anxiety. The connective tissue between all these sources is startlingly clear once you look at the mechanics of power.
Exactly. The mission for today's deep dive is to extract how we can manage our own personal egos, handle difficult relationships, and essentially survive stressful modern environments. So we are focusing specifically on texts 4 through 10 of the Srimad Bhagavatam's 7th canto.
Setting the scene here is crucial.
For sure. So this text details the story of King Hiraṇyakaśipu. He's a tyrant who is described as the most powerful being in the universe. He has acquired literal boons of immortality. He has conquered everything.
He's the ultimate dictator.
Yes. And one day, he affectionately puts his 5-year-old son, a boy named Prahlāda, on his lap. And he asks a seemingly innocent, standard parental question. He says, "What is the best of all the subjects you've studied?" That's text 4.
Which is such a recognizable everyday moment. It's the ancient equivalent of, asking your kid what they learned in kindergarten today.
Yeah, right, expecting them to say they learned the alphabet or how to share.
Uh,
But Prahlāda drops an absolute bombshell in text 5. He looks at the most powerful, ruthless tyrant in existence and tells him that anyone who has accepted a temporary body and a household life is deeply embarrassed by anxiety.
oh, man, just directly calling him out.
Yeah, he says they have fallen into a blind, dark well of suffering. And his advice to his father, the ruler of the entire universe, is to just give it all up, leave it behind, and take shelter of the Supreme Lord in the forest.
I mean, it has to be one of the most intense truth-to-power moments in literature. A 5-year-old diagnosing the spiritual emptiness of a universal dictator.
Okay, let's unpack this blind, dark well concept, because reading that, my immediate thought was about modern burnout.
Hmm.
You're striving, you're achieving, acquiring the promotion or the house, but you just feel like you're sinking deeper into a baseline state of anxiety.
That constant low-level panic.
Right. But reading this literally, I have to push back. Is this ancient text genuinely telling you, the listener, to abandon your family, quit your job, and go live in a literal forest to escape modern burnout? Because that feels like an extreme solution to a bad Tuesday.
Well, taking it as literal geography misses the entire psychological architecture of the text. And this is where the psychological framework from Sukhavadasi's book, Finding the Gap, becomes an essential lens for us.
Okay, how so?
She breaks down the anatomy of our material conditioning. The forest Prahlāda is talking about isn't a physical place with trees. It's a state of consciousness. Hiraṇyakaśipu represents the ultimate false ego and what the sources call the mentality of ownership.
Basically, the delusion that we are the supreme controllers of our environment, the ones firmly holding the steering wheel.
Precisely. When we operate purely from the head, meaning our analytical brain and our calculating mind, we try to manipulate everything around us to serve our own enjoyment and stability.
Right, trying to force the mechanics to work.
Yeah, but because the universe is inherently uncontrollable, that constant friction between our desire to control and our inability to actually do so, well, that creates the dark well of anxiety.
That makes total sense.
The GAP series refers to this as having a cataractic vision. You might possess immense power or wealth, but you are blind to the actual spiritual source of your strength. You think you are the source.
And Hiraṇyakasipu's reaction to his 5-year-old's advice is incredibly telling about how the ego actually functions. I mean, think about modern parents. We get upset when a toddler talks back at the grocery store.
Oh, absolutely. It's humiliating.
But in texts 6 and 7, the king doesn't pause for self-reflection. He literally laughs it off. He assumes his son's intelligence has been spoiled by the enemy.
The enemy, right.
Yeah, he immediately orders his guards to protect the boy from any disguised Vaishnavas or devotees who might be secretly infiltrating his palace to teach the boy this subversive philosophy.
Notice the ego's defense mechanism there. When the false ego is confronted with a genuine spiritual truth that threatens its illusion of control, it cannot process that truth internally.
It just deflects.
Exactly. It immediately perceives the truth as an external hostile threat. It has to be an enemy attack, because admitting the flaw is internal would cause the ego to collapse, so it projects a villain instead.
Which leads directly into a massive societal mechanism, because the king's paranoia about his son being polluted triggers a formal interrogation. In texts 8 through 10, the king's state-appointed teachers, Sanda and Amarka, take Prahlāda aside.
And this part is so chilling.
It really is, because they don't scream at him. The text says they use mild, pacifying voices. They ask him, how has your intelligence been spoiled? Was it you or the enemies?
They are presenting what the Mundaka Upanishad calls aparavidya, or lower knowledge.
Right. It's an education based entirely on duality. Politics, economics, dividing the entire world into friends who help you get what you want and enemies who stand in your way. They're trying to force him back into the matrix of us versus them.
And this is where Dr. Harvey Cox's sociological research on the mind control controversy from the 1970s provides such a brilliant modern parallel.
Oh, cult deprogramming stuff.
Exactly. During the 70s, you had a huge wave of young, middle-class people suddenly adopting intense spiritual devotions. They were chanting, meditating, joining ashrams, and mainstream society absolutely panicked.
They didn't know how to handle it.
No, they labeled it brainwashing. Parents were literally hiring people to snatch their adult children off the street to deprogram them.
It's fascinating because society didn't panic over the theology itself.
Right.
They panicked over the behavioral shift.
Because a materialistic society inherently fears spiritual autonomy. A culture built on aparavidya values production, economic efficiency, and consumption above all else.
And if you're not consuming...
Right. When someone drops out of that economic machine to pursue spiritual ecstasy, society views it as a malfunction. It perceives joy without consumption as a literal threat. So when these teachers interrogate Prahlāda in mild, pacifying voices, they aren't just asking questions.
They're trying to fix the malfunction.
They are attempting the ultimate 1970s-style deprogramming. They're trying to rehabilitate him into a productive member of a materialistic empire.
Now, I want to bridge this to our geopolitical sources. And I have to state clearly here, we are strictly reporting the structural analysis provided by the source material. We are not taking any political sides or endorsing any viewpoints here.
Absolutely. We're just looking at the mechanics described.
Right. So looking purely at the structural analysis, this friend versus enemy mentality. This macro ego scales up perfectly to the global stage. The analysis describes how declining empires often lash out with a war of destruction because they are deeply addicted to control.
Specifically, mechanisms of financial control, like the petrodollar.
Exactly. And when that control slips, the state reacts exactly like Hiraṇyakaśipu did when his son stopped obeying the rules of his reality. It escalates to brute force.
The structural parallels are identical. The mentality of ownership operates the exact same way, whether it's a single human ego or a massive nation-state.
But here's where it gets really interesting. If the material world, whether we're talking about a toxic boss, a manipulative institution, or a global superpower, if they hold all the leverage, all the money, and all the weapons, how do you actually survive without playing their game?
Because if you fight back on their terms, you get crushed.
Right. So how do you win?
You survive by understanding the concept of the escalation trap. In asymmetric warfare, if a smaller nation meets a superpower in a traditional tank-on-tank battle, the smaller nation is obliterated.
So they don't buy tanks.
Right. The geopolitical analysis points out how Iran's strategy against the U.S. relies on shifting the dimension of the conflict. They use proxy networks, economic choke points, cyber warfare. They change the terrain entirely so the superpower's traditional strength becomes irrelevant.
They refuse to engage in the material stalemate spiral.
Exactly. And Prahlāda intuitively executed the ultimate spiritual version of this asymmetric warfare. When his father's deprogramming failed, Hiraṇyakaśipu escalated to physical violence.
And it was brutal.
Oh, incredibly. He had his son thrown under the feet of massive elephants, hurled into pits of venomous snakes, tossed into boiling oil. But Prahlāda didn't try to punch the elephants or fight his father's guards. He completely shifted the dimension of the conflict from physical resistance to spiritual endurance.
He stepped outside the paradigm of aparavidya entirely. He didn't see his father as an enemy to be defeated in combat, which meant his father's weapons literally had no conceptual target to strike.
It's a completely different battlefield.
But, surviving those kinds of attacks requires a very specific structural understanding of reality. You can't just passively sit in boiling oil and hope for the best. Which brings us to why Prahlāda was so unshakable.
Well, to understand Prahlāda's resilience, we first have to understand the root of his father's violence. According to our sources on overcoming envy, Hiraṇyakasipu's rage was fueled by a profound scarcity mentality.
Envy.
Yes, envy is a disease entirely unique to the material world because it relies on duality. We feel insecure when others possess something we desire, or worse, when someone exposes the fragility of our power.
And Prahlāda was exposing that fragility just by existing.
Exactly. Prahlāda was breaking the rules of his father's reality simply by refusing to fear him. The tyrant needed fear to validate his existence.
So, to counter that exhausting duality, we have this incredible verse from the Mundaka Upanishad 1.1.3. It's a famous philosophical anchor. It says, "By knowing which, everything becomes known."
Such a powerful line.
It really is, but I struggled with this initially. It sounds poetic, but mechanically, how does realizing the single source of all things resolve these intense material contradictions? Like, how does it help you survive a snake pit?
Right, it sounds a bit abstract, but the Upanishads provide brilliant analogies to explain this mechanism. Think of a gold ring, a gold bracelet, and a gold crown.
Okay.
The forms are entirely different, the names are different, their uses are different, but if you deeply understand the actual substance of gold, you automatically understand the essence of all those forms.
Because the reality is the gold and the shapes are just temporary.
Exactly. They also use the analogy of a spider weaving a web from its own body or hair growing from a living human. It demonstrates that the universe and everything within it isn't a separate creation sitting far away from God. It is a direct emanation of the Supreme.
Let me try to translate that into a modern framework for you, the listener. Let's use the analogy of a tree. In our daily lives, we burn out because we are frantically trying to individually wash and polish every single leaf on the tree.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
You're managing 100 urgent emails. You're dodging a toxic coworker, paying inflation-adjusted bills, trying to fix a flat tire. It's exhausting because you treat every leaf as a separate, isolated crisis.
And that is the peak aparavidya approach, trying to manage the infinite, fragmented details of the material world using only the calculating mind.
Right. But Prahlāda remained completely peaceful while being attacked with deadly weapons because he wasn't looking at the leaves. He was watering the root.
Yes.
He meditated on Vishnu, the source of everything. He realized that the weapons, the fire, the elephants, and even his screaming father, it was all just the Supreme Lord's energy temporarily taking different shapes. There was no enemy. There was only the source.
He saw the gold, not the terrifying shape of the sword it had been forged into. That is true spiritual vision.
It's a profound shift in perspective. But let's be honest about human nature here. Knowing this philosophy intellectually, understanding the gold analogy in your head, is one thing. Applying it emotionally to the person who is actively screaming at you in a boardroom or across the Thanksgiving dinner table, that is something else entirely.
Oh, absolutely. That gap between intellectual knowledge and emotional reality is exactly what the second book of the GEP series, Entering the Gap, addresses.
Okay, so how do we cross that gap?
Well, the first book diagnosed the calculating head, but this book is about moving into the devotional heart. And the mechanism for making that move requires confronting what the tradition calls your anarthas.
Unwanted habits.
Yes, but it's deeper than just, biting your nails. Anarthas are deep-seated psychological conditioning: pride, anger, lust, envy. Think of them like background processes running on a computer.
Oh, I like this analogy.
If your computer has 50 heavy programs running silently in the background, processes of ego, resentment, and fear, your CPU is completely drained. When you actually try to run your core operating system, which is compassion and spiritual vision, the computer freezes.
You just don't have the processing power left.
Exactly. You cannot apply universal vision to a toxic coworker if your heart's processing power is entirely consumed by your own anarthas.
That makes so much sense. And it explains what is arguably the most shocking part of the entire Prahlāda narrative. Despite being tortured, poisoned, and repeatedly almost murdered, Prahlāda never hated his father.
It's almost unbelievable.
He embodied this radical, almost incomprehensible compassion. He perfectly executed the principle of hating the disease, but having profound empathy for the patient.
Because his CPU wasn't logged down by the background process of his own ego, he had a perfectly clear lens.
And the climax of this story proves that the leaves can never outsmart the root. The Supreme Lord finally intervenes to protect Prahlāda, manifesting as Narasimha, an incredible half-man, half-lion avatar.
And this is where Hiraṇyakasipu's mechanics completely fail him.
Right, because Hiraṇyakaśipu had secured these elaborate boons from the creator god Brahma, ensuring he couldn't be killed by a man or an animal, indoors or outdoors, during the day or the night, on the ground or in the sky, or by any weapon.
It's the ultimate false ego attempting to legislate its own immortality through technicalities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the source of all things just finds the cosmic loophole. Narasimha appears at twilight, neither day nor night. He catches the demon in the doorway, neither inside nor outside. He places him on his lap, neither on the ground nor in the sky.
It's brilliant.
And being half man and half lion, he uses his fingernails, not weapons, to end the tyrant. It's a visceral demonstration that trying to outcalculate the universe is completely futile.
You can't outsmart the source.
But what happens next is the real lesson. When the tyrant is finally destroyed, Prahlāda doesn't cheer for his abuser's death. He actually prays to Narasimha for his father's spiritual salvation.
It is the ultimate symptom of a pure heart. Synthesizing this for anyone listening today, if you want to handle difficult relationships, whether it's an adversarial parent, a narcissistic boss, or just the friction of daily life, you have to cultivate this revealing the heart level of compassion.
You have to see past the immediate threat.
Yes. You must recognize that their hostility, their lashing out, is merely a symptom of their own anarthas. They are trapped in their own dark well, frantically trying to steer a car with a detached steering wheel. By advancing in your own spiritual practice, by watering your own root, you can remain internally untouched by their chaos, exactly as Prahlāda remained unscathed by the fire.
You don't get pulled into their dark well because you refuse to fight them in the dark. You maintain your autonomy by maintaining your connection to the source.
You change the dimension of the conflict entirely.
This has been an incredibly rich journey today. Let's just summarize what we've unpacked from this towering stack of sources.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. We started by seeing how the false ego builds a dark well of anxiety, rooted entirely in the illusion that we are the supreme controllers of our lives and the exhausting apara-vidya duality of constantly fighting enemies.
Right.
But by understanding the mechanics of reality, by realizing the single spiritual source of all things, watering the root instead of polishing the individual leaves, we can step out of that material escalation trap. We don't have to meet brute force with brute force or stress with stress.
Right.
By clearing our own anarthas, we can navigate the most toxic adversarial environments with true, unshakable resilience.
We finally let go of the steering wheel and realize the vehicle was always being guided by something much larger.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. We've talked entirely about individual survival today, how you can personally navigate a toxic system using radical compassion. But it leaves you wondering, if our entire modern society, our global macro ego, is built from the ground up on aparavidya, that lower knowledge of dividing the world into useful friends and hostile enemies to maximize production, what would a civilization actually look like if its core operating system was Prahlāda's radical compassion?
Oh, wow.
Right. If a society stopped polishing the leaves and started watering the root, would it survive in the modern world, or would it completely transcend it?
That is a staggering question.
Something to think about the next time you feel your hands gripping the steering wheel just a little too tightly. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking the root of all things. We'll catch you next time.